we're good. The library doesn't have heat and air, so it's just the ambient temperature in here. They're having some struggles back and forth. So the good news is we're lowering our carbon footprint tonight. We're not running any heat and air, so that's a good thing and perfectly in keeping with the theme this evening. So, well, go ahead and welcome everybody. I'm Christian Wagley. I work for Healthy Gulf and had the honor of serving on Mayor Reeves' transition team. I'm also a board member for 350 Pensacola, so together 350 Pensacola and Healthy Gulf hosted this meeting tonight. Johnny Artis is one of the board members as well for 350 Pensacola. My colleague on Mayor Reeves' transition team overseeing the environmental issues, Kelly Hagen. So this is our chance, and Kelly's the president of the Council of Neighborhood Association Presidents of Pensacola, known as CNAP. So it's all the neighborhood presidents from all across the city, and Kelly does a great job running that. So together, we're gonna, this is our chance really to report back to all of you. A lot of you helped us with the report and the community. It was a community-informed report, and so it's only fair that we obviously come out and share our findings, share what we found, and share our recommendations, so that we're really glad that you're all here, because we need all of you to help push these things forward, right, from just recommendations into actual action. So we're going to share a little bit about how the process worked serving on Mayor Reeves' transition team, how we did our work, how we gather information, and then most importantly, our recommendations and our thoughts and ideas for how to carry those things forward. We'll try to, we'll take questions during it if there's short clarifying questions about something real brief, but otherwise we'll just take all the questions at the end and we'll leave plenty of time for those. You good?
Yeah.
We're good?
Yeah, jump into it. Let's do
it. Well, let's hit it. So, as you all know, Mayor Reeves was elected in August. He got more than 50% of the vote then, so it didn't need to go to the full election in November. And I guess shortly after that, I had been talking to him a couple of times on the phone about environmental issues and things, and he was talking about his transition team. And I had the honor of serving on Mayor Robinson's transition team 4 years ago. And so I told him, I said, I'd be happy to do that again and work on environmental issues if you'd like me to serve you. And so we talked about that a little bit, and then he had this idea of having more than one person do it. And I just kind of thought, it kind of complicates things, because as you know, when you're on a public body or public committee like this, you're under Florida's sunshine law and open meetings laws, which I fully support, but it does make it more difficult for you to do your work, because if there's somebody else on that committee now, or somebody else on the environmental issues with me, the only time we can talk about stuff, right, is in a public meeting. So it's a little bit cumbersome as that goes. So I kind of thought, well, I don't know. And he said, well, do you have any recommendations? And so I gave him two names, both women who happen to be serving on the city's environmental advisory board, and he selected Kelly of those two. And it was a very wise choice for a couple of reasons. First of all, Kelly's amazing. She's super smart and does great work, and as she says, she knows how to get stuff done. But it absolutely made my work and my service on the committee better, because we tested each other, challenged each other, asked each other questions, pushed on each other as far as our recommendations and our work. And so ultimately, Mayor Reeves made the right choice. Now, our group was only 2 people, but there were other categories that had, I think, as many as 4 members, I think, right? Yeah. So we met, Kelly and I together met, I think, 7 times.
9 times.
What's that?
It was 9 times.
9 times.
Yeah, it was 9.
Most of those were at City Hall. One was out at in the East Side neighborhood at the Cobb Center. I think we met out in the community that one night. And then the whole committee, which was 29 people, met at City Hall typically on Wednesday mornings. I think we met maybe 4 times starting end of September into mid-November or so. And as you all know, even with 10 people around a table, it's hard to talk a lot, but with 29 people,
it was impossible.
It was just more about just reporting on some of the basic things. We did quick report outs, and we kind of got our instructions on where the committee was. Tim Kinsella, who was a Navy captain had been captain of the Naval Air Station Pensacola, and he's now at UWF. I think it's the Leadership Institute. He was our chairperson, and he did a great job, and it was a pleasure to serve with him and really to all of our fellow members. So, and our charge was to get out in the community. Obviously, talk to as many people as we could, take the pulse of the community. We did that in different ways. I keep up with a lot of studies and reports and various things so that I have kind of that science side. But I met with different people, a lot of people from different agencies, whether it was DEP or ECUA, a lot of city staff, people from different environmental groups out in the community, and lots of regular citizens and stuff. And you might want to add in some of what you did.
So, we only had 2 months to get this all done, and when I got the call from DC mayor-elect at the time, I was like, "Are you sure? Let me call Christian." And Christian, before I accepted the position, I was like, "Should I do this? Because I'm definitely not an environmental professional." And he goes, "Oh no, I recommended you." So anyway, once I committed to it, I knew that it was going to be tricky because of sunshine law, and I couldn't call up Christian and talk to him. So although it was tricky, it forced me to kind of branch out and reach out to other people in the community. And we could have spent 6 months or a year talking to people, but we only had 2 months. And so we did have 9 meetings. I think the whole transition team only had like 50-something meetings, and we had 9 of those. So we definitely, put our foot down, and I was like, I have to speak to Christian, so we have to have enough meetings so that we can communicate and work out what the recommendations were going to be. So apart from my meetings with Christian, most of my meetings were pretty informal. Meetings with people over coffee, backyard gatherings. I went walking around the city with a couple folks. Phone calls squeezed in on my drive to work, or when my son was napping. So I basically, reached out to just about anybody who would talk to me: friends, neighbors, coworkers, council people, environmental professionals, academics, and tried to get in touch with as many people as possible.
So in all of our discussions around town, we heard about a lot of things, and some of them are, little things, but those were things that were on people's minds, and clearly not all of them could rise to the level of top priorities, but we wanted to make sure that we let everybody know that we heard you, right? because you need to do, in this kind of thing, you need to do more listening than talking, and so we both did that, and we just literally kept a running list of everything we heard from people, and so there's that list. Those are all the things we heard about from the community, and again, they all couldn't rise to the top priorities. In fact, we were told from the beginning each committee member could only have 3 priority recommendations. So we knew all along, we were going to have to digest it down to those top 3. But that's the list of all the things, the full body of things that we heard about. And so we had the way they structured our report. There was really a first part which was called observations, which was sort of like how we did our work, which we've kind of already talked about, and then just the current state of affairs, the things we learned, and we could also include in the observations small recommendations, things that didn't rise to the level of a priority recommendation, but things that we wanted to be sure to get into our report, that we wanted the mayor to know about, that, hey, this is something you should consider or to look at, but it's not going to be one of our 3 priority recommendations. And so I did want to say that Kelly and I agreed right away that the biggest environmental issue facing the city, and you could also argue perhaps economically and socially as well, is climate change. And this is just one example of how different counties across the nation are affected by extreme heat and humidity, and you see where Escambia County is a hot spot for that. The human body can only cool up to a certain point, and when you combine heat and humidity together, we're looking at many days in the future, especially, and this is already happening now as we know, but getting worse in the decades ahead, where there are going to be periods of the year where you just can't do outside work, and even somebody at rest, the body can't cool beyond a certain point. They call it wet bulb temperature. And this is really a proxy for so many other things. It's difficult to stand up here and talk about a community that I've lived in for almost 30 years now and that I love, but to realize and recognize that life is going to get harder here. It's not going to get easier because of climate change, and that's multiple ways that that's happening. That's things like extreme heat that are going to limit our ability to work outside and do things like construction work and agricultural work. It's the sea level rise. So just to give some perspective, the amount of sea level rise we've had in the last 100 years, now we're going to have that same amount in the next 30 years. So 3 times the rate of what we've been used to of the rise, that then there's a corresponding retreat of the shoreline. And the city is really out in front. The city of Pensacola is out in front in our area on studying that. They did a vulnerability index. You can pull that up on the city website, and you can literally see water starting to come up through storm drains and into the city in the decades ahead. We're also going to continue to see, and this has already been going on for 50 years, more intense rainstorms like the 2014 flood event. So it's simple physics. A warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture, so there's more potential for that. And then the same thing with hurricanes. Not more hurricanes overall, but more of the big ones, more of the category 4 and 5 hurricanes. So all these things together are already making life more difficult here, but they're going to make it even more difficult in the years ahead. And so there's both an adaptation side of that, which is raising walls or using natural infrastructure, various things to respond to what's happening, and then there's a mitigation side as we have to reduce our emissions and get off the dirty stuff, right, and go entirely clean. So I'll let Kelly share her observations first. Forget what we had. There we go. So let's just no slides on that. So have at it.
Okay. Yeah. So, going into this, the strategy that I was kind of going for, I knew Christian would be the one who was reading the reports and up on the latest information. So I kind of really tried to look at what had already been recommended in the past, what had Christian recommended 4 years ago when he served on the transition team. And I sit on the Environmental Advisory Board, and we were given the Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Task Force document, and that document was supposed to be kind of like our Bible, what we were supposed to kind of go by. So I started looking there just to kind of see what had been done, what's already been recommended, what has been done, what hasn't been done, why. So that was kind of my strategy, and going out into the community and talking with people. I was just trying to kind of take the pulse and really listen and hear what everybody had to say, and then the city staff as well. It was all very, very much just a lack of communication, I think, on a lot of different fronts. But yeah, that was my strategy, was just to figure out why things weren't being done that had already been recommended by people that were much smarter and wiser than I. So.
Good. So just some of the things that I looked at through part of my work. One of the ways to organize, I guess, all environmental issues really fit into one of these 4 categories, and so I tried to look at the issues we were facing and researching in this context. And I can just say something briefly about each one of those. I've already kind of talked about the climate change perspective and how that's affecting Pensacola. Air pollution, our trends are in a positive direction as we slowly transition away from fossil fuels. We're seeing fewer air quality issues in the area. And also as pollution control equipment has gotten better on power plants and then also on automobiles as well. Even if they're still running on fossil fuels, they don't put out as much of the dirty stuff as they did 25 years ago. So the air quality is trending in a positive direction here, and that should only get better as we totally transition away from fossil fuels, because most of our air pollution really comes from the burning of fossil fuels, especially in this area. Habitat loss, which is one of the things, especially for terrestrial plants and animals, and along with climate change, the biggest drivers of loss of species and loss of biodiversity. I think when you think about habitat loss for the city, you kind of need to look at it through a regional lens. So you think about the city's pretty much built out. It's great. A lot of it's great habitat for people, right? But there's only some relatively small areas that are kind of in a very natural state. Maybe the Carpenter's Creek floodplain would be one example of that, which hopefully can be improved for more public access and all that in the future. I know the county's working on that. And then maybe some of the areas along the bluffs, for example, in a fairly natural kind of forested state. But I think really looking at it through a regional perspective, most of the wildlife, and especially all the wildlife that's endangered, these are animals that need big open spaces of forest. They also need fire. Landscapes here burn. They have to burn to be healthy. And you can't have prescribed fire really in the city, right? So one of the things the city's main contribution, I think, for habitat is by absorbing that larger urban population and accommodating it smartly, and that's part of smart growth, instead of continuing to spread out and eat up the most valuable lands of all, which are those big green spaces at the edge of town, and pushing up toward Blackwater Forest and up toward Alabama and all that. If we can accommodate a lot of that growth in the city smartly, we avoid eating up those huge open spaces, which we absolutely have to preserve in order to preserve watersheds and in order to preserve habitat for really all those major terrestrial species that are endangered because we're encroaching out on their habitat. So I think you have to look at the habitat loss kind of from that perspective. Now, that being said, there is very strong support for plantings in some of the parks that could help with things like insects and maybe some birds and things like that. So that can be tailored to the individual park. But there is very strong support for that. Because the city doesn't maintain things very well, I'm always reluctant to put in more things that have to be maintained. I will say the city council more recently is getting better at recognizing that deficiency, and they're starting to shift some money toward, they had the recent example was the Roger Scott pool with no bathrooms, and so they had to take money from somewhere else. And I was like, how can we have pools and the bathrooms don't work? I mean, but we have a lot of things like that and elected officials will tell you it looks great to open new facilities, but trying to get the money, and you can get the money to do, but the money to maintain things is not nearly as just doesn't play as well in the public. And then water pollution ended up occupying a lot of my time because it had been in the news quite a bit. I will say the city is in a much better place than almost any other jurisdiction around because we have a stormwater utility. Everybody pays it if you're a city landowner, property owner, based on the amount of impervious surface on your property. So that gives the city a dedicated source of funding to do stormwater projects. It's been in place since, I think, 2000. They focused on Bayou Tahar first and focused on water quality first, and they've definitely seen improvements from that. They're now moving into trying to get into more water quantity, kind of flooding issues, which are going to be more expensive to deal with. But I think the city of Gulf Breeze is the only other one in the area that has a utility like that. But it absolutely puts Pensacola ahead of almost every other jurisdiction around because we have that dedicated funding to do projects. So Bruce Beach I wanted to talk about because that's been a lot in the news about potential contamination or bacterial contamination in that area. How does that happen? How does that get there? The city drains out right to the nearby waterways, and it drains out through the storm drains that you see on city streets. And the Department of Health, they test these areas through the Healthy Beaches program. They test three spots inside the city: Bayou Tahar, Sanders Beach. Those are locations they've tested for many, many years. Bruce Beach is a newer location, and they were getting a fair amount of what would you say, hits, what we call fecal indicator bacteria. So these indicate the presence of basically feces that could come from any of a number of sources. And you see at the top, they talk about it could come from humans, it could come from pets like dogs and cats, it could come from wildlife like raccoons and birds. And they don't really know until you do more detailed study which it comes from. But if those bacteria are present in high numbers, it's not the bacteria that are the problem, it's that they can indicate other pathogens, other disease-causing organisms can be present. And so that was showing up repeatedly at Bruce Beach. Councilwoman Hill was able to get the council to fund some additional, more detailed work in the Bruce Beach watershed, and then along the paddling trail. Barbara's here and UWF did that extra sampling work to go above and beyond what the health department could do. So this took up a lot of my time looking into this, doing fact-finding, talking to all the entities, the agencies that are involved in it. And really what I found was they were, based on the study that had the study results that had come back from last summer, ECUA and the city and DEP were all working really well together. They were out in the field, they were doing the sampling, they were trying to find what the sources were. And so, there was a time 20 years ago when ECUA was not in a very good place. They didn't have good people, and they weren't doing the things they needed to do. They're under a consent order. They have been since 2012 to mandate repairs of their system, and the people I deal with there now are all just consummate professionals, and they're working very hard on solutions. So everybody was doing all the things they needed to be doing to take those issues seriously and working out in the field. Just a quick look at how this stuff all works. So the blue pipe would be your storm sewer. So that's that drain where the water from the street goes down the drain. It should be clean, right? But it's not. It's got stuff from our cars. It's got dirt, loose soil from just yards and construction sites. Even leaves are a pollutant in that sense when they get washed out in mass at certain times of the year. And then there's a whole separate system under the street as well, which is the sanitary sewer system. That's the wastewater. That's what goes down. That's what goes down the drain from the toilet, from the sink in your home. And these things shouldn't be mixing together. And sometimes there are ways that can happen. That can happen through illicit connections, right? This library actually was connected illegally like in the 50s and had discharged all that time until about 10, 12 years ago or something. It just got found out that was discharging raw. It was an accident, or a plumber back in the day did it, whether it was a purpose or not, but it was clearly an illicit discharge. What was going on 10, 12 years ago when ECUA got under consent orders, they had a lot of broken pipes, and that was allowing water to come in. It's called inflow and infiltration, and then when you get a rain event, that water backs up and overflows and causes the wastewater to discharge out. So they've been fixing that now, and in this area, out over here, south of Garden Street, they've already fixed like 79% of their pipes because they're under that consent order. So they've done a great job retrofitting and cleaning up all that. What they're finding now is a lot of the problem is the private line. It's called a lateral. It's what goes from your house out to connect into the ECUA line here. That's your responsibility. Some of those are 100 years old. They're terracotta. And what ECUA's been doing, and this is really helping people, they're going out and they literally have a machine that can run a scope up through their main line and then trace it up onto private property and look at the private lateral. and then let the homeowner know if there's a problem. They'll go up in there and they'll see broken pipe, they'll see roots from a tree, they'll see dirt in there that shouldn't be there. And otherwise, a homeowner typically doesn't know that unless it backs up in their house, and then it's a real problem. So they've been doing that and then sending letters to these folks. The problem with these failing laterals is that this allows that inflow and infiltration, and when it rains, all that water comes in through these private laterals, gets into the ECUA system and overwhelms it. It's designed to only handle a volume that should be coming from houses. Now when it rains, it's handling all this extra water. That's what causes it to back up and fail. So there's a responsibility for people to fix these. They want the city to work together with them on an actual ordinance where they'd have some more enforcement capability for people that don't take the actions they need to fix it, because it puts a burden on everybody. What they're saying is if they can't get these fixed within a reasonable amount of time, and they've already looked at it, they almost did it before, they've got to build a big tank downtown, which would a burden that would fall on all the ratepayers to catch that extra water during these storm events so that it doesn't back up. And that's not the solution we would want. What needs to happen is these need to be fixed. The city's been really responsible through their housing department for lower income folks. They have money available to help them if they qualify to totally pay to, I think it's a totally forgivable loan. They pay for the whole thing, and then as long as you don't sell the house within 5 years or something like that, the loan is forgiven. So, but that's a little bit about how the plumbing works, and it appears that, you know, as they work through this, they'll find in some places they may still have some issues with the ECUA's pipes, but they're finding a lot of the problems are with these broken laterals on private property. And when they went out in the fall and did a bunch of that field work, they were able to find the one that got repaired was where an ECUA line actually ran through. There was like a stormwater drain, and the only way it could work would be the ECUA line had to work through that, and then the FDOT did some work and it shifted that whole vault and it broke the pipe in there, and that was leaking out. And that was, as soon as they found that, they fixed that right away. That's surely probably not the only problem up in the watershed, but that's one of them. The other interesting thing going on that seems to indicate there may be problems with these broken laterals is that in other areas where they tested, they did find presence of birds, but that was a very small amount. At first somebody told me that was the main source, and that ended up being incorrect. Now birds were in there, they were in the mix, which is not unexpected in an urban watershed. You're going to find that, but the big source at that time was the human source. And it's a snapshot in time. Like you go out there today and find something that may be different, right, than a couple weeks from now, just based on what's going on. But one of the things they found is the presence of sucralose. So this is an artificial sweetener, and when you find, that's a way that the environmental scientists will use as a proxy for bacteria or contaminate the presence of feces or wastewater, right? Because if that's there, then that's clearly not just regular, natural, native groundwater. And so what they actually found, according to DEP, was they found the sucralose, but they weren't finding the indicator bacteria. So it's almost like what it seemed to be, and this is going to require further testing, is that potentially these broken lines potentially could put enough wastewater into almost like a septic system. They'd put enough wastewater into the groundwater where the bacteria were filtered out and they weren't showing up, but the sucralose was still showing up. So that all needs a lot further study, but I wanted to show you all a little bit of how that's works. This is what it looks like when they slip line the pipes. So the cool thing now is when ECUA does that, they don't have to go out and dig up a pipe. They put this like a flexible pipe they run down in there, and then it looks like they apply heat and some kind of solvent or something. It kind of smells when they're doing it, and that just expands up in there and lines the inside of the pipe. And it's a great system, and apparently they've done almost 80% of that area down west of City Hall already. That's what the lateral looks like. I've seen more and more of these getting dug up lately, probably because ECUA has given them a letter and the people didn't know that they had a failing system, so those are getting repaired, which is a good thing. Another really interesting thing that came out of this, and this bears further study in our area, is what they're finding nationwide is that stormwater pipes themselves can have a resident population of the Enterococcus bacteria that they're testing for. And so even in the absence of any fecal contamination, you have what's called a biofilm, just natural, almost like slime that would grow at the bottom of a pipe where it stays wet most of the time. And there can be those Enterococcus bacteria just living there all the time in the absence of any fecal contamination. And then in a rainfall event, when all that water flushes through there, it will dislodge those out into the bay, and then that shows up in the sampling that says, hey, there's a problem with bacteria. But it actually is not from a fecal source at that point. Whether that's going on here or not, I don't know, but that has apparently been going on nationwide. They're recognizing more and more that there's these sources. The pipes themselves can actually be a source. So it's complicated. There's a lot of different moving parts and sources, and it's been a good learning experience for me talking to all the agencies and folks and learning, going through that. So this is what my recommendation was in that part. The observations that they just need to follow this. DEP has already worked out how to find these sources and to work through this. So they just need to go watershed by watershed, basin by basin throughout the city and follow the toolkit that DEP has already outlined. So that was in my recommendations in my observations. So the big report came out. I think Kelly and I finished all of our stuff by mid-November or so, but then they didn't release it all and finish doing all the editing and make it look pretty and all that until you can hold one up here if you want. It's on the city website, but it all came out around, I guess, January 10 or so. I wanted to just say real quick before Kelly and I get into our recommendations. These were my recommendations for 2019. I was able to do 5 with Mayor Robinson's team, and I checked off the ones that did get done. So the city, under Mark Jackson, the sustainability coordinator, did do a greenhouse gas inventory, which is on the city website, and they'll be updating that every year. And then they did hire an additional crew to clean out the stormwater inlets. The others have not happened yet, or only to some small degree, and we'll talk some more about that in a moment. But those were the ones from 2019.
All right, so we're hopping into our recommendations. So Christian and I were only allowed to do either 6 recommendations, altogether 3 apiece. So. Like I said before, we heard from a lot of different people on a lot of different issues. You saw the list; it was huge, and there's a lot of really, really important issues on that list. So for me, again, I'm not an environmental expert. I did not think that cherry picking certain ones was the most holistic approach. So, like I said, I kind of just tried to look at the big reports. Christian's previous report and the Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Task Force report, find out what wasn't being done. And so when I went to the meetings with all the city staff, I prompted them by asking basically how they thought the city could be doing better from an environmental standpoint. What were the greatest hurdles to achieving progress and being effective? And if projects or initiatives have been put on the back burner or slipped through the cracks, then why? And the response was overwhelmingly the same: poor communication between departments. Oftentimes people felt like they were working in silos and just not in touch with the other departments, and that also there was a lack of long-range planning, and also the absence of an environmental department or an environmental champion who had the broad authority to kind of work across all the departments to achieve compliance and coordination. As I continued, I didn't know what a chief resiliency officer was when I first started these conversations. But as I continued to talk to the city staff, it was brought to my attention that a chief resiliency officer was somebody that would be in charge of a lot of these long range strategies. And as it turns out, the issues mentioned, the lack of communication and such, are not unique to Pensacola, and that CROs are brought on for the very purpose of breaking down silos within city government and allowing for that collaborative and innovative nature necessary for the city departments to integrate plans and policies to meet the resilience goals. I reached out to when I started looking up chief resiliency officers. This is kind of a new position. It hasn't really been around for a very long time. So I was able to speak with Jim Muirley, who's the CRO of the Miami-Dade County, and they also have, so the city of Miami, Miami Beach, and Miami-Dade all have CROs, and I reached out to all of them, but I ended up getting in touch with Jim, and he's kind of been, he's been the CRO, I think, longer than maybe anybody else. So he had some really good information. He stressed the importance of communication, both internal and external, and that clear and consistent messaging was of utmost important, not only to ensure that the staff are on the same page, but also to gain support and participation from the public. The job description of a CRO can vary depending on the needs of the municipality, but the responsibilities can include a range of topics addressing environmental issues such as flooding, sea level rise, disaster response, water quality, heat, stress, green infrastructures, as well as socioeconomic issues such as chronic poverty, safe and affordable housing, expanded transit, and social inequity. So, although it is a fairly new position, there are a few cities in Florida that have hired a Sierra recently, Jacksonville and St. Augustine being a couple of those. So when I was kind of trying to say, why isn't all this, why aren't the recommendations from the past coming together, it really was clear that basically you can have the best plan, but if you don't have someone to enforce the plan, if you don't have somebody to coordinate these, really long-term, long-range environmental goals, you need all of the departments together communicating on board, working towards the same goal, and that just wasn't happening. So that was why I recommended appointing a chief resiliency officer. Shall I move on? Go on to the next one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So when I was speaking to a lot of the local environmental advocates and people, there was a lot of great ideas, a lot of people who have been the boots on the ground for a really long time and kind of were just feeling like maybe they weren't being heard. So basically people who were longing for like a more collaborative relationship with the city, but were feeling discouraged because there wasn't a platform to kind of bring these certain ideas forward. So, okay, so in my conversations with both city staff as well as members of the community, one of the questions that I asked was how the city could be, what the city could be doing to make environmental improvements in the short term. And one of the reoccurring themes proposed was the idea of pilot projects. So this did come from city staff, and it was mentioned, like I said, when reaching out to local advocates as well. But from the staff perspective, the idea of these small-scale creative strategies, although they were favored, the reality of them moving forward on something like this was unlikely because they just didn't feel like they had the time or the resources to do that. So although they thought that was a good idea, they did not think that that really it was very realistic. So local advocates, like I said, echoed this idea and gave examples of these projects. And then while they were excited by the prospect of devising and implementing more innovative and unconventional ideas that could move the needle on environmental improvements in the short term, they also felt like the idea was unlikely to be supported by the city. And the general tone from many members of the public was that of frustration and disappointment in that the city had a wealth of resources and knowledge within the community, but did not have the desire or intention to capitalize on that asset. So that was what I was hearing from people, And so that's kind of why I felt like having an actual program where people can bring ideas forward, small scale. So I guess the purpose would be to prioritize the intergovernmental and community collaboration to achieve shared environmental goals. So the program would aim to cultivate new partnerships with local groups in order to leverage knowledge and resources and invest in ideas that facilitate action, undertake innovative, non-traditional approaches to remediation, and make measurable improvements toward the city's goals of sustainability and resiliency. Part of the criteria of these projects theoretically would be that they would be scalable and able to be implemented citywide if outcomes were considered effective and successful. And the program could fund a broad range of environmental projects, including, but not limited to, green infrastructure, stormwater projects, bioremediation strategies, habitat restoration, permaculture projects and green spaces, transportation strategies, sustainability and resiliency strategies, recycling projects, tree planting, education, outreach, those type of things. So projects that would meet the criteria could be ranked by a committee, ideally comprised of both internal staff members as well as external members, which would provide a broader range of expertise and technical assistance. Since the grants for these projects would be fairly small, implementation could be contracted out through a third-party work development program, such as Oyster Corps, Franklin's Promise, BioCorp, and which would, basically make it easier to get some of these things implemented on a tight budget. And an important detail to highlight, I guess, was the intent for the program is to provide a truly collaborative and coordinated city-community partnership. This would be like the idea would be to have a co-development, co-agreement that the city, that would ensure the city's commitment to the partnership as well as the organization's participation through the entirety of the project. So it's really people from, like I said, local groups bringing forward ideas and really working with the city. So that was, when I heard that was kind of, I divided all of the information I was taking in into kind of what the city staff was telling me and what I was hearing from the public. So I really felt like this would be a way to get the city paying attention to the local advocates and the local groups that have been out there, like I said, boots on the ground for decades and aren't really being heard or don't feel like they're being heard. So all right, well that's that recommendation. And again, so one of my strategies was looking at Christian's recommendations from the previous transition team, Mayor Robinson's transition team, and planting more street trees was one of his recommendations. And this one seems like such a no-brainer, right? An easy win-win. Everybody wants to plant trees. So why hasn't that been done, right? So the issue of planting trees is it's complex and requires extensive planning, maintenance strategies to ensure survivability that oftentimes rely on a collaborative effort between the city and either private like businesses or residents. So that's kind of what I learned when I started asking questions. Why aren't we planting more trees in the right of way? So yeah, like I said, where do you put the trees? Who wants them? Which district do they belong in? Which tree? We need the right tree in the right place. Who will plant them? Who will water them? Who will make sure that they're maintained long term? So they're all difficult questions to answer, and moving forward can be especially challenging when you're spending taxpayer money on a plan that to some extent must rely on a collaborative effort between the private citizens and the city. So I guess there's two parts to this. We have money from a tree trust fund. The only money in that tree trust fund comes from fees, mitigation fees, and fines from removing trees. So that was problematic to me because I think one of the arguments that Sherry Myers, former Councilwoman Sherry Myers, was making was that a lot of the trees that were a lot of the money from the tree trust fund got there from trees that were cut down and removed in her district, and that there wasn't that much money being spent on trees in her district. So if that's the model going forward, then there's a lot of districts that wouldn't be be able to have much money to spend. So I made the argument that basically we should have money coming in from alternative sources of revenue, so that there's more money to spend and more freedom to spend it. And then, like I said, coming back to the city basically needs to my opinion is that the city should streamline the process of planting trees by coming up with a strategy that is easy for neighborhoods, citizens to kind of come to them and say, okay, what do I need to do? So East Pensacola Heights Neighborhood Association did a really good job navigating some of these difficulties, and assembled like a really impressive and coordinated plan, which was brought to me when I was sitting on the Environmental Advisory Board. And the Environmental Advisory Board almost turned them down. So, they applied for the tree trust fund money and came to us with this great presentation. And the Environmental Advisory Board was like, well, what if these trees die and they don't survive? And I just spoke up and I was like, listen, I am the head of neighborhood associations, and I can tell you that these guys are way more organized than many of the other neighborhood associations. So we, the Environmental Advisory Board, ended up saying, yes, I think we should go forward and let East Pensacola Heights have this tree trust fund money and have them kind of be the pilot, group, so we can learn what worked for them, what didn't. And so it was a great success. They planted, 25 trees in January of 2022. And so my recommendation was for the city to kind of like look at that process and try to model something similar, so that it is difficult to get trees in the ground. It's difficult to get trees in the ground in the right-of-way, which is where they do the most for the public. They have the most benefit for the public.
I had a couple of more slides here.
Yeah. So
this is one of the tree planting projects that Civicon did that I helped with. We got some trees donated and did that over in a public housing project off of Pace Boulevard. And those are street trees along an otherwise barren area. And then just to speak to Kelly's point about the benefits of street trees in particular over other kinds of trees, add that in there. So.
Yeah. So we all know the benefits for sure. Obviously, increased property values, cooler streets, saves public dollars, safer for pedestrians. It kind of narrows the, Christian taught me this from a bike ped standpoint, it narrows the field of view. So, if the trees are closer to the road, people tend to drive slower, good for the environment, reduced stormwater runoff, all those good things. So yeah, it is difficult to plant street trees, but that does not mean that we don't need to do it. And there's a lot of money that's just been sitting in the tree trust fund for quite some time, and not a lot of it has been spent. So that's, like I said, with my recommendation, I was like, we need to bring in more money and we need to streamline this process so that we can get more trees in the ground.
This is one slide I think that speaks to the difficulties, if you want to. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that or not, but
I have not. But.
So, the city puts trees in parks because it's easy. They just walk out there and they look for an empty spot and they just stick it in the ground. Street trees provide actually many more benefits that the trees in the park doesn't need. I mean, we need both types, but the problem here is there's a bunch of conflicts, right? There's stuff, and this diagram actually doesn't even show the stuff above you. This is from New York City, where I guess they don't have above ground power lines, but we have that here typically. Not on every street and not on every side of every street, but we have them a lot of times. But this is just an example from New York City showing all the things they've got to look at. There's a lot more details to sweat when you plant street trees, and so it's just more work, and the city just doesn't, if you're not funded to do that or don't have somebody empowered to do that, you just don't do it, and you look for the easy thing. And we got to get trees in the ground. Go out to that park over there. Let's get some more in the ground. So that was just an example showing all the different things they've got to look at for conflicts with infrastructure and such. So.
Oh, another aspect of the street trees, I was able to speak to the arborist, Chris Stoltz. He identified the urgency for improved planting practices. Him and I went and walked around down by Jocko's down there, and he was able to actually show me. He's like, let's go look at this tree. I can tell that it's dying from these little things at the top, and he was able to go over and go, oh, look, that one was planted with the basket still there, and that is not good planting practice. So according to Stoltz, the average lifespan of the urban tree is between 30 and 35 years, and that poor planting and pruning practices are largely to blame. Stoltz, who was hired in just spring of last year, said that he has already observed suboptimal planting practice and lamented that many contractors have just been getting away with bad practice forever. Among other suggestions on how to improve overall tree survivability and maintenance strategies, Stoltz suggested an improved method for vetting contractors, making sure that the job is getting done properly and that there's proper oversight, as well as withholding a greater percentage of payout when the job is complete, like 15 to 20% as opposed to 5%, to ensure compliance and more favorable outcomes for survivability. So I also included that in my report. So that was another. We have to plant the trees correctly. We have to make sure the right tree at the right place. We have to have good pruning practice. And we need more money.
Yeah, I had looked in kind of in support of Kelly's work on that. Looked at I've been tracking how much Pensacola spends on trees over the last few years, and we're typically spending maybe $4 a person, maybe $5. It's varied some. And our peer cities in Florida might spend $10, $12,
$6
$15
per capita on planting trees.
The more recent one was
$6.
They got it up to $6, but
yeah. But compared to St. Augustine, for example, who spent $11 per capita in 2021, but $20 per capita in 2020. So we're definitely a little bit
And
behind.
that's come to light recently with the stuff at some of the debate at City Hall about spending some of the tree trust fund monies on removing dead trees. When I did the transition team report for Mayor Robinson 4 years ago, they were a year behind. If you called and said, I got a dead tree in the right of way out here that's going to fall down, they'll say, we'll be there a year from now. Now it's 2 years. So they were trying to catch up with that, and there's controversy about the source of that money, whatever, and then we'll get in all that now, but Kelly's been working on that some, and that may come up again before the city. But it points out the larger issues, which we don't, everybody wants trees, the city council says they want trees, but we actually don't really invest in them the way we need to, and especially on the maintenance side. So.
All right.
Can we take them all questions at the end, unless you just had a real quick clarifying question, but.
It's not even a question.
Oh.
Chris is going to be doing a tree pruning demo at the garden on March 4th.
Oh, nice.
Sweet.
We'll help get it out. You can get us the information. Yeah, we'll promote it. Cool. So my turn to do a few. So I got 3. It was funny at the beginning, Kelly and I were talking. It was like, well, I guess we could do, if we're limited to 3 recommendations, then we're like, well, that's 3 recommendations per person, right? We want to send 6 recommendations, not just 3. So they said, 3. You could do 3 per person. So we did 3 each. So I just an update. I did a similar goal 4 years ago with Mayor Robinson that the city set an aggressive goal. The city council set that 30% renewable energy by 2030 goal. That's really an interim. They need to set a 100% renewable energy goal. 12 cities in Florida have done that. Climate change is the biggest issue facing the city, certainly environmentally, and we need to push at every level. The federal government now has taken the step with the Inflation Reduction Act passed last summer. That's the biggest federal action ever on climate change. It mostly pushes money out throughout the country to basically conserve energy and electrify everything and transition to renewable energy in so many different ways for manufacturing, batteries and solar panels here in the U.S. to help you get a heat pump water heater or a heat pump on your home and add insulation. Same thing for businesses. I mean, it's billions and billions and billions to do that over the coming years. But we need the push at the local level as well. And so I felt like the city needs to go ahead and set that 100% renewable energy goal by 2040. And the mayor could do that. The council could do that. It would be great if they both did that. I will tell you, Mark Jackson, through his leadership, the city sustainability coordinator, they are moving forward with trying to meet that 30% by 2030 goal. And so they did a solar study looking at feasibility on different city facilities. And one of the top scoring ones was the Bayview Community Center. So that RFP, I think, will go out this year. He was working on it recently. And I think there's a couple others lined up as well. But the ones that are going to get the best return on investment and the way they ran the numbers, this was one of those that came out. So hopefully that will, it may not happen this year, but at least the contractual side of it and the RFP and all that stuff will go out. And at some point we'll see solar panels on that building and then some other city buildings to follow as well. So I wanted to make a couple points about the city's natural gas utility called Pensacola Energy. It's funny, 4 years ago when I did Mayor Robinson's report, I wrote in there that the natural gas utility has to go away. And that's obviously not a popular thing because this is $8 million a year comes from Pensacola Energy into the city budget to use on all kinds of other things wherever the city council wants to do it. So as an elected official, that is not what you want to hear, to think that $8 million, we're not going to have that anymore. And it's funny, when I went and met with them, they remember that I had written that in there. They reminded me, and I said, oh yeah, I know, I put that in there. But I said, there's an update for that now in 2023. The natural gas has to go away, and it's going away. There's no doubt about it. Whether Pensacola Energy wants to go out of it or not, it's hard. If that's what you do, it's hard to imagine getting out of that. But these are larger national trends. We used to think natural gas was this bridge fuel that was going to take us from coal to the clean stuff. But now, when we've done a full life cycle assessment, it's as bad as coal, or almost as bad as coal, when you look at greenhouse gas emissions. And it is a fossil fuel. It's a finite resource, and we have better ways now of running our homes and businesses and industries and all of that. So it is going away, whether the industry wants it or not, because there are better things coming. And through things like the Inflation Reduction Act, that money's all toward electrifying. It's not toward using more natural gas. The update to my recommendations for 2023 is Pensacola Energy doesn't have to go away, but they will stop selling natural gas, but they could sell something else. And so we had some discussion a year or so ago about the city creating its own electric utility as an alternative to FP&L. FPL's lots of controversy, extremely high rates and very poor service. Their customer service ratings and all that are rock bottom, whereas Pensacola Energy's ratings are very high. People like Pensacola Energy, actually. They do a good job. They serve their customers well. So they could simply sell something other than natural gas, right? I mean, that would be a big deal, and the city would need to study the feasibility of that first. There are already 33 city or municipal electric utilities in Florida, but the city council last year had a chance to fund a study to look at that, and they chose not to do that at that time. But I did write in my report that they need to continue to look at that, because eventually, especially as the Inflation Reduction Act incentives take place, the natural gas sales are going to start to, I mean, we're just shifting away from that. That's just no question about it. So they're going to have to deal with that, and they might as well look forward instead of waiting till the last minute and struggling with, where to fill the gaps of that $8 million. It's not going to be there anymore. My second recommendation was to create a sustainability plan, kind of getting back to what Kelly was talking about. We both ran into this talking to city staff, where especially when you're trying to shift an organization and when you're trying to shift the city toward a more sustainable path, there's friction inevitably in that, right? You're changing the way people do their jobs, you're changing the way things have always been done, and there's friction. And in the absence of a plan, it's not really clear among the staff, like, what's really a priority, who should be doing what. It's much easier to push back against something. Whereas when you have a plan and you have goals and objectives and targets to hit, it's very hard now for a staff person to say that we're not going to do something, because the mayor can clearly say, we have a plan and this is what we're doing, and we're going to follow it, and we've got to hit these goals. So a lot of cities in Florida have these, like they have chief resilience officers. Pensacola does not have a plan like this. And so in the absence of that, like I said, it just creates much more difficulty for the staff members that are trying to move the city forward. So we absolutely need to create that plan to empower them and to give us those goals and those targets to work toward. And those are some of the things that a plan like that might include. And then finally, this is a very similar recommendation, or almost identical to what I had 4 years ago. We need to change the rules for development in the city, and this is a trend nationwide. So for actually more than 70 years, we've had zoning codes, and that's what's in our land development regulations. And zoning is about the use, right? And so this is commercial, and this is residential, and this is institutional, and we're going to separate it all out, and now we have to get in the car to get between all these things. And it creates very ugly, dysfunctional places, which we know now after 70 years of doing that, we understand fully what that does. And it creates communities built around cars. That's the only way you can get around. And communities built around cars, if you remember nothing else from tonight, remember this: communities built around cars perform terribly environmentally in every way. Communities built around cars, once people live there, and by the way, the things that happen there are just like when you bake a cake, the ingredients are baked in. The elements of a neighborhood or a community built around cars, those things are baked in, and you live in a way that the built environment shapes our lives every day in profound ways. And when you live in a place where the best way to get around, or the only way to get around, is by car, it drives us toward more greenhouse gas emissions, more water use, more energy use, more land use. All the environmental performing indicators are worse in that kind of scenario. And that's really, in most cases, people's only choice is to get around by car. Lot sizes tend to be larger. We're separated from our daily needs, right? So we have to travel farther to get to those, so we use more energy. And so my idea is that it's really hard to do that in existing neighborhoods where people live residentially, but you can do this in key commercial corridors, because we have a different level of acceptance along business corridors. And so Bayou Boulevard, North 9th Avenue, North Davis Highway, obvious ones, where if we can implement these form-based standards, and what form-based standards are basically, well, this is what we have now, right? These ugly commercial strips. It's not a pleasant place to do anything other than drive, and even that's not pleasant, but you certainly don't want to walk or bike there. Places like 9 Mile Road, these are places built for cars, right? They're very ugly. They're constantly under construction. The amount of space that's devoted to parking, absolutely off the charts. It's hot, it's ugly, it creates vast amounts of stormwater runoff. But places built for people are beautiful, and this is the way we used to build everything really prior to World War II. And even if you don't live in a place like that, even if you've all visited somewhere where clearly it nudges you in the direction of, well, it's easier to walk to this, it's easier to take transit, it's easier to bike, because the built environment is shaped. It still has streets, it still has buildings, it still may have some, but it's the way those are arranged. And when you arrange it in those more traditional patterns, you get an output like this, and the environmental performance is so much better. And so form-based standards, what they do, remember, zoning is fixated on the use, but with form-based standards, they're more prescriptive for development that say, you've got to bring the building forward to the street. If there's parking, you've got to hide it behind or inside the building. You've got to have interesting storefronts and a certain amount of glazing or windows so that it's not ugly, bare walls. We may require you to do street trees. We may require you to do street furniture. It's a total reshaping of all those things so that cars may still be there, but they're tamed and they're kind of pushed to the side, and this allows people to come out and be front and center. And so this is a growing trend nationwide. Hundreds of communities have done this. Some have done it for entire cities. City of Miami has done it. City of Baltimore has done it. They know that to deal with not just things like climate change and all the environmental performance of the city, but even if, as a form of economic development, young people especially want to live in places where they can walk to stuff and they have cool places to hang out, and not so much around cars the way us older folks were with the car generation. And so right now, though, most land development regulations, this kind of stuff is illegal. It all pushes you toward the cars, towards spreading everything out, towards separating uses. But form-based standards start to give us more of a built environment that looks like that. And again, gets us away from the cars, supports more, and mixed use is an important part of it. So like that building there, like just to use an example, like if you're putting in this building here, does it matter what goes in there? If you build a beautiful building on a beautiful streetscape, it could be a school, it could be shopping, it could be residential, it could be a mix of all of those things, right? Which is how we used to do things before World War II. But the form-based standards help ensure that it's done in an attractive, people-friendly way. And there's a huge opportunity for us to do that here in Pensacola along those key commercial corridors. Out of that. And what we're trying to work toward is more that traditional form of development where things are connected, our daily needs are nearby, all the things are integrated together. Remember what the suburbs do, what zoning codes give us is they separate everything. And so, if you live here, you always have to go out on that main road to get to anything else. And that creates massive amounts of traffic. That's why we don't have traffic jams downtown, because of the street grid, right? And the mixed use and all those things combined together, we don't get that. And we're starting to see some of this. This is Savoy and Belmont de Villiers that came in. We have the form-based standards in some of the older parts of the city, the CRA areas, but we don't have it anywhere else. And it has definitely improved the quality of what's being built in the CRA area is definitely better because of that. It honors more of the historic DNA of these areas. One of the things we're trying to get at, and this is a national thing, is what we call missing middle housing. For the last 70 years, we've built some big apartments at one side, and we built single-family detached has been what everything has driven toward. That's been the American ideal. But now, for purposes of affordability, for purposes of creating more environmental communities, we need more density, and there's beautiful models for doing that, and that what they call missing middle housing, things like fourplexes and triplexes, which are illegal in a lot of places. And so we need to open up our codes and allow us to build more things like that. And form-based standards make sure that even with more density, it gets done beautifully. And this is why you'll hear Americans that live in very low density suburban areas go to Paris and think it's like the most incredible thing ever. And it's dozens of times more dense than anything they live in, but it's how the pieces are arranged, right? And that makes all the difference. And that's what form-based standards help to get us to. One of the biggest opportunities in Pensacola that needs a form-based standard put on it is Cordova Mall. It's seen its best days. Something will be there, but it will not be an enclosed shopping mall anymore at some point. And literally thousands of people could live in that area. You could cut a street grid in on that and have a town square. It could literally be like a downtown, uptown, as it's been coined. And imagine people walking across the street to work or biking to Sacred Heart and Pensacola State College, those major employers that right now you drive 2 blocks, right? Because it's miserable to do anything other than drive. So there's huge potential in that. But we've got to get some standards in place to make sure it happens in a people-friendly way, which didn't happen at University Mall. They did when they redid that. I was hoping they'd mix some residential in or something, and it ended up being just kind of more of the same. So people definitely, there's interest in people getting around more in ways other than just by car. That's a hugely growing trend in Pensacola and everywhere. And these form-based standards are going to help do that. I can tell you, as somebody who's on my bike almost every day, how much richer the world is, how much more I experience of the world and my neighborhood. I can smell the flowers in bloom. I can smell people cooking dinner. I can talk to people that are working in their garden or fixing up an old house. The world is just a richer place, and I hate to think that I would spend my whole life driving everywhere. But if you're in a lot of neighborhoods, that's really your only choice. So those form-based standards help to get us to that better place so that hopefully when we go to meetings, that's the parking that we see. Lots and lots of bike racks full of bikes. And we can do that. But all of this stuff's going to take, it's going to take all of you. It's going to take all of you going to things like city council meetings. The mayor and council have different responsibilities. So the council passes the laws and they appropriate the money, and the mayor runs the city day to day, kind of like what the president would do in Congress, kind of similar to that. But things work better when they're both together on the same page. And so I think we've got a very good mayor. He's been doing very good things, making smart choices. He's a very smart guy and seems to be very reasonable in how he does things and listens and gets good information. And we have an excellent city council as well. Years ago, we'd have council members that showed up and they hadn't read the agenda and they weren't really prepared. And they're all prepared now. They've read, they're prepared for the meeting. They've asked questions and they come in informed. So I think we're in a much better place as far as that goes. So I think just a thing from Brock Evans of, how you get stuff done, you just got to keep going. Chris Kerb's a good example of that. He shows up at every meeting, but you do have to keep doing it. And you can apply pressure in a polite and respectful way. You should do that, but you do need to keep doing it. So we're happy to take questions.
I'll try one. So you talk about increasing density, but you have to have infrastructure that will support that and have capacity for that as well. Does Pensacola have capacity in its infrastructure to support greater density in housing?
Yeah, especially in the older areas where there's a street grid, they can support a much, much greater density because there's not. So first of all, you hope that as we make the city more walkable and more bikeable, more and more trips are made without a car, so you don't have that type of congestion. But inevitably, there's still some car use, and basically from Fairfield South and Brownsville East, you have that urban street grid within there, and that can support a lot more density than what we have now because the street grid gives you all those different ways to diffuse traffic. A suburban area can probably accept less density because of the way the street network is, but it would definitely be a case-by-case basis. It's hard to make that statement for the whole city-wide.
So the trade-off, you said old neighborhoods like tear down and build something new?
In some cases that's the case. Now the form-based standards that I'm proposing would only be applied along major busy commercial roads. They wouldn't be applied back into. There's just no reason to do that right now in neighborhoods or anything. But you could see, for example, the opportunity to have more things like apartments and more dense living along some of the busier roads that hopefully will become quieter and less busy over time as we transition our city. But
Has anybody suggested closing streets?
Oh, and sorry, I'm supposed to repeat the question. So the question from Bob was about closing streets. The only one that's really talked about is because it is closed occasionally for events, is Palafox Street. And what would be a great start would be just to close it every Sunday. And I was actually talking to one of the downtown improvement board people about that recently, and I know the mayor has talked about it, but that would be a good start toward. I think we're a ways away from the need for it to be closed, permanently. We just don't have enough population downtown to justify that. But I think just every Sunday would be very, very doable, and it would bring tons of people downtown to do that. But that's the only street that really kind of supports, I think, the need for that. But
in your example, though, where streets are closed, people will congregate. So whether it's one day a week or certain nights from a certain time, the more you close, the more people will want to congregate. So
it has to be, as long as it's the right street. Yeah. So it has to be a street. Humans like a sense of enclosure. So if we went to 9 Mile Road and said, well, we close the street, go hang out. Nobody's going to hang out there, right? Because it doesn't have a sense of enclosure. So it needs the buildings around it. And the only one we have that really has that mainly is Palafox, maybe a little bit of Belmont de Villiers has that too. I see Danny thinking Jefferson Street maybe. But there's a few examples. There's not a ton of examples,
I'm
but
just
yeah.
About conceptually, you pick the right ones that people will probably frequent that more because it draws attention to it. So if there's a reason for it, there's a art show or there's a market or whatever, you close the streets around that and let people park at and walk in and walk out. That's all.
We are social creatures, and if you give people great places to hang out, they will come and hang out. Yeah.
Coffee.
Yeah. Coffee, anything, music, art. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Oh. About Larua as well. So right by the garden in the new skate park, they talked about closing. I guess it's Larua. Yeah. On the south side of the garden, they talked about closing that and actually digging it up because it's got the old bricks under it. Helen had mentioned that a while.
Yeah, and I think, so the question was about, or possibility of closing La Rua at the garden and skate park area there. So it doesn't make a good gathering place as much because it doesn't have the enclosure and it's noisy from the road and everything. So it doesn't have that same feel, I think, that would justify as like as much of a gathering space. We'll have to see what the skate park looks like and how it feels like, once that's open. The other thing is we don't want to ever say ever, but almost never break up the urban street grid, because that's what makes the city walkable and bikeable in the older parts, and what allows us to support the density is that street grid gives you all those different connections and ways to get around. And so breaking that up can be a real negative thing, unless there's a really compelling public purpose and reason to do it. So traffic calming, a lot of times people want to close the street, but it's not that you don't need any car, you just need cars to drive the speed limit, right? And that's where we need traffic calming to slow them down and stuff. So anyway, we'll have to talk about more about that one, but I'm not sure if that would make sense for them to close that one there, but interesting. Yes, Sarah.
I was wondering whether transportation ever came up, like public transportation, having jitneys in Pensacola that ran on electricity or anything like that would then maybe dovetail with the ECAT.
So the question was whether anybody brought up public transportation and electric jitneys and things like that. I didn't really have anybody bring it up with me. Did anybody talk about it with you? Or?
At our, we did the CNAP transition team kind of meeting with us and the livability group focus area. And I think that it came up then too because, why can't I think of her name?
Carolyn?
Yeah, Carolyn Growy. She was, very, very much an advocate for public transportation, better public transportation, and transit, alternative forms of transit, and also, crosswalks, walkability, bikeability. So I think it came up a little bit there. I remember hearing something about it and having you say that we obviously don't have the density to have like trolleys like they do, trolley cars or street cars like in New Orleans or something like that.
But we're getting more as some of these apartments come in downtown, and as we add density, it creates more of the conditions that transit needs. But we've invested everything in cars and making them go faster, and so we're in that awkward phase now of transitioning. And so I think hopefully if every passing year we can become a better place that can support transit. And I love communities where they've just made it free. I mean, that's great. And I have a bus pass I use on occasion. Sometimes I put my bike on the front of the bus if I've got to go far or something like that. But keep thinking that way and keep pushing it, and hopefully the conditions will get better for it in the future.
Other cities are transitioning from diesel to battery-powered buses, large buses, so and even school buses, so which emit a lot of pollution.
Yeah, the diesel's bad. So
Because they're on the road.
With that, it just brings to mind that with your form-based, which I love that, opposed to the zoning and everything, the form-based planning, is that something that should possibly be considered now as far as public transportation when they are devising form-based planning and everything, that they're keeping that in mind, that in the future when we are larger, we may need some type of public transportation?
Yeah, I'm not up on all the transit planning, but obviously, I mean, if the form-based standards, there's no reason they couldn't get implemented in the next month, right? If they decided to do it, but then it's going to take many years for the built environment to change, because what happens is eventually the store wears out and they want to replace it, and what would happen is that suburban style that's way back on the property with a parking lot in front, it would be forced to come forward to the street. It'll take like decades to switch that all out, but it will happen over time, slowly.
I was going to say, you hope, obviously we don't work for the city of Pensacola, so we can't answer all these questions, but you hope that, I know that strategic planning, long-range planning has been, as I stated in my report, it's, been a weak point for the city, and it was not just brought up by me, it was brought up by several people, and I know that that's the mayor intends to have, put a lot of effort towards strategic long-range planning. So yeah, maybe having that foresight to say, okay, maybe 15, 20 years from now, we are going to need a trolley that runs up 9th Avenue and across, here and there and wherever. maybe. I hope so. I hope that there's people in place that are, having that vision, but yeah, we can't answer that. We can just hope.
No, but we're at a great advantage as far as there's so many places for us to go and do the research on. You mentioned Miami earlier, and I've been there part of the time, and there's a lot of stuff that is right along the alley of what you've been saying, the whole thing, but it came from the back door because it was buildings that they didn't want to tear down, they didn't want to take away, and so it's more of a repurposing type of form-based, and that has done wonders. And what's happened, what I've noticed, what I've seen a lot in Miami is what's happened is the people that want to be at the walkable and stuff, there's still streets, there's still roads, there's still cars, but the cars don't want to be around there as much anymore because there's too many people walking everywhere. So it's almost giving a reverse where the people are demanding, okay, no, we're walking on this street. Move your cars elsewhere. You're seeing a lot of that. So I think we're very fortunate that we have those places that we can study to think of that it's going to come in the future. So.
Awesome. Yeah. We've requested a meeting with the mayor. We haven't been able to get in there yet, just to be able to sit with them and explain all of our findings and such. But hopefully that'll happen in the next week or two.
Hopefully the report is only it's not the end, it's just the beginning of the conversation now.
Any other questions or comments? Or yes, sir.
Does the power plant run on natural gas? Is there a plan to transition that to renewables?
It does now run on natural gas. I think as of about a year and a half ago, it had switched entirely off coal to natural gas. But FPL is building. The cheapest way to provide electricity today is solar. And so that's what they are building. And so over time, they will, I don't know when that would happen, but they would. The problem is they have interest, they have financial interest in heavy financial interest in natural gas, and that's complicated their desire to get off of it as quickly as they should. But in the marketplace, the cheapest way to make electricity today is solar. And so they should be deploying more of that. And they are deploying a lot of it. But as far as when that plant will shift away, I'm not sure when that would be. Obviously, there's still the advancing technology with batteries that needs to happen to take away the intermittency. So with the gas plant, they can fire it up and down whenever they want, and there's still the intermittency and storage issue. The batteries are advancing like very rapidly. That'll take away the need to have a fossil fuel plant to make up that difference. But we're not there yet. So
I was confused, but the city becomes renewable, dependent only on renewables, but that doesn't work in the dark because you got to depend on the power plant, and if they're doing renewables, then it takes a less pressure for the city to do solar, for the commercial system of solar.
yeah.
It's a lot of moving parts.
There are. I mean, transitions are awkward, right? Just think about a transition in your own life. But this is like one of the biggest transitions in the history of this nation is transitioning from fossil fuels to clean energy. But it's happening. It's inevitable. The question is how fast and how soon it can happen. But yeah. Barbara.
So one of the heartbreaking things about the transition to solar, which is wonderful, is that we're now seeing natural lands cut down and turned into solar farms. And it seems to me that there should be an intermediary step in there where before you cut down natural lands, where you're actually getting, think about your street trees and the benefits there, and everything else as far as habitat, but that you're actually putting solar on a lot of the new homes, so that instead of, completely denuding a forest and making that into a wasteland with solar, that you actually are putting it on the new homes, high-density homes, for instance, DR Horton, and what's happening with OLFA. I mean, that would, that's 640 acres a square mile. That would be an awful lot of solar on rooftops.
So the point was about we're losing some of our open space for solar fields, and that's true. It would be better to put them on rooftops, and we try to do that as much as the utilities don't want you. That's the part of the battle is they don't want you to do that, so they will put up barriers to your doing that. Florida is one of only 4 states that doesn't allow what's called a power purchase agreement. They don't allow you to use it. The utility companies can use it. But a power purchase agreement allows another company to come in and put the panels on your roof. You just sign a deal like, hey, 20 years you can use my roof, and you'll buy the power back from your own roof, but the third party owns the panels. That's illegal in Florida because it's basically you're making them out like a utility, and the utility's got that pass to protect themselves from competition. But in other states, you can basically get free solar and buy the electricity back off your roof that way. So that's limited us, unfortunately, from the rooftop here in here in Florida. But I mean, inevitably there's going to be.
Talking about transition, so that transition should be mandated. Before you're removing one system that's already providing ecosystem services, but we don't even understand what we need for something else because it's not economic.
Yeah. So was there another? Yes, sir.
Hey, it's my
Hey.
first time in Pensacola.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Kind of traveling in the country. So I wanted to share some things that I've kind of seen with city design, but also ask a more practical question. So I started in Brooklyn, actually.
Great work. Bye, Danny.
One thing
Thank
I
you.
saw there was there's a lot of rooftop farms that are being built. So right on the rooftop, and that's led to the cooling of the city. I saw that was really cool. I was in Savannah, Georgia. A lot of green spaces. Gainesville, what I really like about Gainesville is that there's these bike trails that we can bike right from downtown, right to the nature preserve. And I thought that was really cool. Farmers markets everywhere. Fort Lauderdale and St. Pete have the electric trolleys you mentioned, which I thought was really cool, and they're all free. I was actually in Amsterdam in the spring, and there's heavy bike culture, and there's bicycle parking everywhere, which I love. So I wanted to ask if all these things are super cool, and I love the whole concept of the form design, but it seems very theoretical at this stage. So my question was, who is in charge of building the city? Would it be like the chief resilience officer? Who is actually, I guess, managing these types of designs?
Well, we have a planning staff that implements there's a comprehensive plan, which is like the question was about the, he shared a bunch of examples of different sustainable things he'd found in different cities, and then asked about how the form-based standards and other planning is done in Pensacola. And so we have a comprehensive plan, which is required by state law. That's like the big picture of how we want the city to grow. And then the land development code gets into more of the nitty gritty. And we have a planning staff that implements that. But the planning staff is not encouraged to be creative. They're not urban designers. That's just they implement what the code says this, and this is what we're going to do. And if you give them a different code that says to do great things and make it form-based and make it beautiful and make it people-friendly, they would implement that as well. But that's not going to come from them so much. The city council would need to pass the law and change the code to adopt those form-based standards, as they've already done in the older parts of the city here. But now we need to extend it up into those along those busy commercial corridors that are so car-oriented now.
I think a chief resiliency officer, if one was hired, would most certainly, that is their job, is to basically identify the long-term goals and then work between the departments to get those things accomplished. So they would have the authority. This is somebody who would work in a very high administrative position directly underneath the mayor. So they could go to any department and say, hey, this is what needs to happen in order to make plan whatever, achievable and happen. So yes, I think.
Sorry, one more real quick, but we realize it's almost, the library kicks us out at actually before 7, so we have to wrap up. I apologize. We've got to put the chairs away and do all that stuff. But did you have one, Chris?
I got one quick question. I'm Chris Kirby, Blood Centers. I'm also an advocate. In December, the ordinance 2922, the city passed this ordinance, coastal management comp plan, and it's about sea level rise and climate change, and that's one of the things that I do for flood readiness is in the state of Florida, our own DOT publishes obsolete rainfall data to their stormwater designs with. Right here in Pensacola, we have a rain gauge at Pensacola Airport, and the difference for the city standard is a 100-year design storm. The difference from that old obsolete data is 2.76 inches. And I brought this up at City Council. NOAA has published stuff that goes to 2012. If you take the city and you multiply 2.76 inches over the whole city, then it's a lot of water that's not being really accommodated in stormwater. So I asked the city at that meeting, were they going to adopt NOAA Atlas 14, which is federal, most current data available. Is that something that's in your in this plan coming up, or is that not even been discussed?
It didn't come up during our. Nobody brought. I mean, I guess maybe you and I didn't, or you didn't bring it up during that time. So it's not in our recommendations or anything.
Well,
So-
I've already recommended.
But
the city.
yeah, they've heard from you on it. Yeah, yeah. And I'm aware of it. I mean, I know the basic
Yeah,
because you and I have talked about it. But
Kimball County and Santa Rosa County are both looking at that. But yeah, sea level rise
So-
and climate change. We're
so-
seeing
yeah.
rain and rainfall intensities, durations,
Yeah.
and frequencies are
Th-
getting worse.
Thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate it, and feel free to get our contact information or whatever, and stay in touch. And we appreciate your help in moving the community forward. So.